Welcome to CFC. We're with John Hewa today, the CEO of Rappahannock Electric, and we're going to talk about everybody's favorite topic, data centers. John, thanks for joining us.
Charlie, great to be here and really appreciate the opportunity to chat about this. Thank you first for everything that you do at CFC, all that CFC does to support us, power us up, keep us financially rolling, and also to help educate and inform across the co-op network.
It's our pleasure. I mean, the mission here is phenomenal, and everybody loves working with the members. Absolutely. So it's great. So let's start by talking about the territory you serve, PJM, and even if you have some thoughts nationally, and how data centers are going to impact the PJM market, you, and nationally.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, everybody's reading about it, hearing about it, and some co-ops are already experiencing it and living it. We have got a tremendous amount of load growth that's happening nationally. The forecasts are kind of all over the map, so to speak, but they all point in the same direction. If you looked at forecast a year ago, it would indicate maybe 80 gigawatts, 80,000 megawatts by 2030. If you're looking at forecasts, S&P Global most recently, you're talking now forecasts out to 135 gigawatts or 135,000 megawatts by the year 2030. And it seems like every quarter and every new report raises the bar on what the potential for U.S. data center load growth looks like, and even the pace. In our part of the world, in Virginia, we're in one of the 13 PJM states. PJM's load forecasts have just remarkably ticked up each year, year over year, with respect to the data center driven load and demand. In fact, PJM now breaks out the data center forecast kind of separately from the rest of its traditional load. In PJM, the latest forecast would indicate that PJM will see a 50% increase in demand requirements by the year 2040. And in Virginia, it's 100% increase in demand requirements by the year 2040. So much of that is right in the heart of Rappahannock Electric's service territory.
Yeah, it started here, right where CFC is.
Yes.
I think there's a federal fiber pipe that has attracted a lot of data centers for the last 15, 20 years. And now it's literally headed right to you, and you're already in the game. I mean, so more is coming. I noticed the auction prices in PJM have shot through the roof. Is that just data centers, or is there other stuff going on there?
Absolutely. Virginia's had a strong reputation and a strong history with respect to data centers. NOVEC has led really nationally with respect to electric co-ops. Virginia has led. We've got projects down in Mecklenburg and other parts of the Commonwealth. So Virginia is starting to see a diversification of where the loads are going, and it's represented about 80% of the Commonwealth's investment in the last several years. So it's primary. Virginia is primary with respect to data centers, and data centers are primary with respect to growth in the Commonwealth. But that is putting tremendous pressure on the grid, on the wholesale power network, on PJM, and it's also putting pressure on co-ops like ours to get local infrastructure built out. So if you kind of just take a quick look at PJM, a couple of interesting things have happened. First of all, PJM hit its all-time peak this winter back in January at about 150,000 megawatts. Rappahannock also peaked in that January cold spell at 1,150 megawatts, 1,150 megawatts. What's transpiring in PJM, and some of this is really driven by Virginia's policy and some of its restrictions on traditional generation growth in the Commonwealth. First, we've seen a tremendous rise in the capacity market. That's the price that the generators, in PJM, the generation gets paid a capacity charge to be available. If you go back to last May and you go forward to next June, there will have been an 1,100% increase, an 11 times increase.
It's incredible. In
the price those generators, the same generators, will receive for being available next summer versus what they were getting just a short year and a half ago. At Rappahannock, we've also seen over the past 10 years, going a little bit longer history now, we've seen a 99% increase in the transmission rate. And the investment in the transmission grid in PJM and Virginia has accelerated in the last couple of years, so we're going to continue to see those numbers climb. A couple of other, I think, Virginia trends that are important. while the first 6 months of this year have been pretty pressing with respect to very cold temperatures in January and kind of record heat in June, we've also seen the first 6 months of this year have been 41% higher on delivered energy in PJM in Virginia. So we're seeing a lot of indicators, and I think the last one, and the numbers are not out yet for 2024, but if you go back to 2023, Virginia became the #1 importer of electricity in the nation. And that's about 50 million megawatt hours. It's about 8,000 megawatts. If you convert it to capacity, it's about 8,000 megawatts short of equilibrium, and that's almost 2 years ago now.
Wow, that's incredible. So when you consider that, PJM, what's their integrated resource plan for PJM? What are they looking at as far as putting steel in the ground, building new power? Does that exist? Or
So there's been a new program that's launched with respect to a critical fast pass, if you will, that is looking at particularly at projects at 500 megawatts or greater, and how PJM is working to prioritize those projects. Virginia, to a great extent, has been leaning on its neighboring states, right? And so in a structured market, you can do that to a certain extent. You can lean on West Virginia and Pennsylvania, but what we're seeing now is, well, the data centers are now moving to those states and potentially moving there quicker than the transmission lines are gonna get there to import power. So PJM needs capacity, Virginia needs capacity of all types, and we need capacity particularly right in the middle of the Virginia load zone, which is really in the heart of our service territory.
And that also means transmission too. And so is there a push to streamline the permitting and stuff?
There's been a lot of effort to accelerate. A couple of things to take kind of the legacy engineering and planning processes and to speed those up and to accelerate them, and then also to handle large load requests very surgically, like very individually. And that's not been the way that the planning effort has happened in the past, right? So when you're talking about loads that are 300, 600, 900, 1,200 megawatts on an existing site, or one single site, one potential site, that requires a different level of attention and handling in the planning process. And I think that's the part that we are anxiously awaiting for that to mature at PJM.
And so when we talk about load requests, what's Rappahannock looking at as far as your outlook for what you need in the next, say, 3-5 years?
Yeah, so this is really kind of unfolded in our region in the last 2.5 to 3 years now in terms of the time frame. I mentioned earlier our all-time peak load was this winter 184,000 member accounts at about 1,150 megawatts, and I would consider that our traditional load. And by the way, our traditional load is growing. We're adding over 4,000 meters a year. We're seeing a lot of kind of diversified commercial and industrial growth, everything from pharmaceuticals to distribution and logistics. But the data center growth is next level, right? If we carve that out and we set that aside, we have a load request that is right at 20,000 megawatts, 20 times greater than the all-time peak of the existing electric co-op.
It's hard to believe.
It really is. And while I think there are some uncertainties around how much of that would get built, how much of that could the energy even possibly be delivered for, how much can PJM produce, how much transmission can be interconnected, and when and how long does it take to get there, we know that number is not likely to be achieved. But a very significant portion of that, I believe, will be achieved. And we've already contracted for infrastructure requirements at around 5,000 megawatts. So if you were looking at that 20,000 megawatt potential challenge, about 25% of that is already contracted and in some type of design or procurement or construction around the substation infrastructure. And there are some question marks around how high the rest of that load will go, and that depends on a lot of factors, right? What does Virginia do with its energy policies? How does PJM and Virginia look competitively with respect to other states? And maybe more than anything, how long does it take to get the projects built?
This brings me to the question of risk at individual co-op level. So when you're looking at this as Rappahannock, or just put yourself in any co-op CEO's shoes, what are you thinking? What does success look like? I've heard some CEOs say, I'm not sure I want to serve a data center.
Yeah, well, first of all, we see our role as an enabler in our communities, and we serve portions of 22 counties. They have different personalities and maybe different aspirations around economic development and large loads. But first of all, I would say first and foremost, we see ourselves as an enabler. If our county is embracing a project, and some of our counties have permitted and authorized millions of square feet of data centers already. So if our counties have permitted these projects, we want to make sure that the electric co-op is an enabler and we're doing our part to get the job done. Beyond that, in Virginia's code, we have an obligation to serve, right? We have an obligation to provide power to every account, every member, large or small, regardless of kind of the characteristics of that load. So we believe that providing load and meeting our obligation to serve really involves two things. One, providing the infrastructure, and then secondly, providing access to the electricity, the electrons themselves. So when you start to look at risks, I think you've got to kind of take a step back and look at the world around you. The risks may be very different in an unstructured state with the lack of a structured market. For instance, in the Southeast, those co-ops may be pairing up power plants on a one-to-one basis, right? In ERCOT or MISO or PJM, then you're in a structured market. That provides some new avenues, but it also reflects some new risks, right? In the structured market, we can lean on other merchant power plants and providers to bring the generation. That's, in fact, what the market does, right? The market projects future loads. It works to balance supply and demand, and it works to keep the economic mechanisms stable and predictable. So in PJM, we can sleeve a large-scale data center into the market, and the market sends the signal for the generators to come and to build new generation. But also in that structured market, there are price volatilities that may not be experienced in different parts of the nation. For instance, how high can energy prices go in any 1 hour? What are the liquidity or credit requirements? Those may be dictated by the market, whereas in another state that is not in the structured market, the co-op may be really looking at how to finance a power plant or have a partner that builds and operates a power plant. Maybe it's their G&T or maybe it's a third party. And so those are different types of risks. In our case, some of the biggest risks have involved, on the infrastructure side, making sure that the co-op will not have any stranded assets or investment. And that means complicated contracts and ensuring prepayments for all the infrastructure, and then developing rate designs that kind of stand the test of time. And that's something that we've been doing, right? On our rate design for our delivery, and I'm just speaking of the infrastructure, not the electricity yet, but just the delivery infrastructure, we do require prepayment. We allow the data center to pay that in tranches or stages, and whatever portion is projected but not paid initially is securitized with, for instance, a letter of credit, irrevocable letter of credit. With our tariff, we have a tariff that's presently before the Virginia State Corporation Commission. We're a fully regulated utility here in the Commonwealth. With our tariff, we did something a little unique. We decided to propose a tariff that would bill the data center in perpetuity on installed capacity, not their billing demand. And we think that was a key step to protect our traditional member owners from a data center with an oversized request and a load that never materialized. So that's kind of on the infrastructure side. That's really the way we've structured that side of the business and looked at protecting ourselves over the long term.
So does that tariff include replacement of hardware at a substation in the future?
Great question. Yeah, we've put everything in there. Like we have the, first of all, kind of the carrying cost, right? The ongoing maintenance and a high level of care and monitoring and upkeep for these levels of substations. We're talking, in our case, 300 MVA or 300 megawatt substations with 2 kind of primary transformers and 2 backup transformers. So we're talking about a substation with 4 150 MVA transformers. These are $50, $55 million projects, each one. That tariff has in it a lot of things, but it has all the carrying costs, the personnel, the operations and maintenance expense. It has future replacement cost. It has the insurance for how that infrastructure and those sites might be insured, maybe the same as the rest of your assets or maybe differently. It has our personnel expenses, and it also has, in our case, it has a layer of recovery for turning on our power supply engine, hyperscale energy services. And this is where our approach starts to become really novel, right? What we did on the delivery tariff is, I think, a wise move, and it's a little different, but what we've done on the electricity side is extremely novel in terms of our space.
Yeah, I like it. So I had big concerns because I talked to other co-ops, and I could hear their angst about getting the substation paid for by the data center, but in the future, they'd have to pay replacement. And my instant reaction was, it's not the old days anymore. Talk to that customer. Right. They're probably willing to pay for that because they seem to be willing to pay for a lot. Change the way you do business. And I think that's where we're at, and you're the leading example of that. So let's flow into how you're changing Rappahannock in order to protect Rappahannock.
Absolutely. So REC today is 18,000 miles of overhead and underground power lines, 184,000 accounts. We're right at 10 accounts per mile. We have about 500 employees, and we operate about 4,000 miles of fiber, which includes a fiber to the home system in partnership with Central Virginia Electric's Firefly. So we're already kind of as co-ops go, kind of a unique co-op to begin with. Beyond that, we have an affiliate structure that's emerged over the last 3 years, and we actually operate really 4 different business lines and multiple affiliates. We have Brilliant, as in Brilliant IT. Brilliant is our kind of self-serve REC with IT and cybersecurity and data analytics, and we're now national, helping co-ops in about 18 states and growing. That was kind of designed out of risk management and kind of tuned for opportunity. We have Vividly Brighter, which is a local brand for helping our members with home wiring. We're now installing generators through Generac. We're doing residential electric vehicle charging stations. We're doing some public charging stations. So Vividly Brighter was kind of a local regional brand built, again, kind of out of risk mitigation and risk management for our members on these new services they need, but also a chance to kind of earn some revenue and help the co-op, right? These are for-profit affiliates. I want to be clear. These are for-profit affiliates under REC's nonprofit, fully regulated stature. As we kind of move along here and we get to kind of a different scale, we've developed 2 affiliates to deal directly and intently and to provide, quite frankly, world-class service for the large-scale data centers. The first of those is Hyperscale Energy Services. It's a for-profit energy company that is designed to schedule and pull power out of PJM and deliver it to those data centers. And I want to kind of differentiate why we did it this way. We, in significant collaboration with ODEC, Old Dominion Electric Co-op, our G&T, ODEC does a phenomenal job. They've got a great portfolio of assets. Other assets are working. As costs have gone up, those ODEC resources have helped hold the cost down. ODEC continues to serve all of our traditional load growth, the 4,000 plus meters a year that we're adding, the 184,000 that we already serve. ODEC is doing a wonderful job of serving that. We worked with ODEC to pull the large loads out of that wholesale power contract and to set those aside so that Rappahannock could serve them directly through the PJM market. And this is why we created Hyperscale Energy Services, or HES. But Hyperscale Energy Services allows us the opportunity to start to take that risk and compartmentalize it, to take that risk and put it in an LLC, a kind of off book, off of the co-op's balance sheet. And it allows us to structure the business in a way that we can throttle or manage the level of risk or exposure that the traditional co-op encounters along the way. And then the last affiliate that we've created is Hyperscale Generation Services. HGS. And hyperscale generation, if HES is the left shoe, then hyperscale generation services is the right shoe. And our intent there, we don't have any projects underway with hyperscale generation. It's been created, but our intent is to do exactly what the name implies, to be available and ready to facilitate local generation for the large loads that are going to be the off-takers, and they're going to be the large consumer of power if they want to come in and work with us to construct or operate some type of
Put steel
power
on the
plant.
ground and build a power plant.
Absolutely.
I
we're
like that.
Yeah.
So I'm competitive by nature. Every deal I see, I'm like, I hope a co-op wins that. And I have this concern because we're seeing third parties saying, I'll work with a data center to build a power plant and serve their needs. Exxon said that. They say, we build power plants for refineries. We could do it. I'd rather the co-ops do it, or at least have a seat at the table to decide whether they want to do it. So you're preparing for that day where a data center customer may say, we need power, and you could say, well, let's collaborate, we'll build it together.
Absolutely. We're already having those discussions. And if you're kind of following the national news, there's this scenario or concern where the data centers are outrunning the traditional utility, whether it's a co-op or any other utility. They're outrunning the regulatory framework. They might be outrunning policy. And that's just the pace of their business. So as we are working through hyperscale energy to kind of, in our first order of business, to sleeve them, if you will, that term, to sleeve those data centers into the market, we come in with hyperscale generation services, then to fortify that if they have a desire to make the investment. We're not, our intent is not to leverage our existing co-op members to fund power plants, right? This would be the off-taker, the large-scale data center, making the investment and firming up the contracts to be the off-taker.
So how does that work within PJM? Can that be outside of PJM, or does that asset end up in PJM, or does it become an asset just for that one load?
So there's a lot of controversy around large generation behind the meter. There are actually a lot of concerns around that, right? Because if those generation sources are behind the meter, the market can't manage them. Their availability is unknown. Are they on? Are they off? How do you plan for that? And they're so significant that it's very impactful. It's very material. So I think our position on that, there could be some smaller scale behind the meter things that we work on. There could be energy storage projects. But the intent that I hear from most large data centers would be something to potentially bridge them to get them power sooner, right? Because the demands and the transmission requests are faster than the transmission owners can get transmission built. So they want power sooner as a bridge. And then the other thing that we're hearing of is that they want to make sure that they've got continuous power and they've got some type of hedge against future, escalation and inflation of power prices. So there's a lot of drivers why a data center might want to make that additional investment, and it fits. If you look at the scale, right, a typical data center building today might be about 250,000 square feet. They're starting to go larger than that. It might be about 70 megawatts. They're starting to go larger than that as well. It might operate at 70 to 80+% load factor. That could even increase over time. But these are, $800 to million to $1 billion buildings individually. Yeah. And so as you think about a hyperscale campus that is designed for 6, 8, 10, 12 of these buildings or more, the notion of spending a few $1 billion on a power plant to provide some certainty and some reliability and some hedge against future market pricing, that really starts to fit at that hyperscale level model.
Yeah, not only that, but it puts the obligation to pay for it with the data center, not on REC's member consumers,
That's right, and in our opinion, and I think utilities in Virginia would agree with me, any new capacity in Virginia is a good thing, right? Yes. Virginia needs capacity, and that may come to realization in a number of different ways, but any investment of new capacity in the load zone in Virginia would help all ratepayers, co-ops, and others alike.
Yeah, I feel like administration at the federal level and even states now are realizing we got to get quicker at this. Hopefully, they're going to follow through with streamlining permitting and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to some, candidates for public office in Virginia as of recent, and my advice to them has been, regardless of policy, Virginia needs to authorize 10,000 megawatts of emergency generation in the load zone right now. We can figure out the other steps later, and that number is probably short of what our new import level looks like. When Virginia became the number one state for imports, that's not something you necessarily want to be number one for on electricity because, other states and regions kind of control our destiny. That represented 36% of Virginia's consumption. Yeah. And that number has surely gone up in 2024 and is probably going up again in 2025. So 10,000 megawatts would be probably the minimum first step that I think Virginia needs to take to kind of get back to equilibrium.
Is this creating a big market for the third-party aggregators of distributed energy? Can they scale in this and sell capacity into the market?
I think, as the capacity price goes up, it incentivizes a lot of different things, right? Number one, it's driving electricity prices in general. It is calling for, power plant investment of any type, but particularly power plants that are recognized as capacity. Some of the renewable projects are either not recognized as capacity or derated so substantially in PJM that they don't really benefit or they don't necessarily react to that capacity signal. For instance, I believe the latest factor, I think the latest factor that I observed in PJM was that most solar projects are coming in at about 11%. Like it's what they call EELCP, but it's about 11% of credit towards capacity. Which means that while it could consume a lot of land and it might generate a lot of power on an annual basis, it doesn't get a lot of capacity credit because it may not be there. And in fact, our all-time peak was in January in the dark and the cold.
Yeah, and frankly, they've been out selling them at nameplate capacity for years, and people don't understand nameplate isn't what's delivered. Yeah, it's substantially less than nameplate.
Yeah, in Virginia, there are a lot of dynamics playing out right now around local jurisdictions and land use and land utilization, and there are kind of concerns around how will Virginia's land and how will the lands in these counties be consumed or obligated, and there are many jurisdictions that have taken steps to kind of step away from or limit or prevent to a certain extent utility scale solar. So I think there is a certain movement and incentive around the aggregation of resources. Energy efficiency means more, demand response means more than it ever meant. But the real fix for this is base load dispatchable generation in the load zone in Virginia.
Yep. So let's talk about the resources you personally have had to make, and also the co-op in building a better business to chase these large loads. So you're in a regulated state. You have the State Corporation Commission in Virginia.
Right. We changed the law in Virginia.
Exactly.
Right?
So that was a major focus of yours, and legislative issues, and also talent. You don't necessarily have the talent at a distribution cooperative to create your generation subsidiary, your energy subsidiary. I mean.
So I've said in a few venues, and including at the CFC Forum in New York, when the business changes, change the business, right? And I want to be clear on that. I'm not talking about a departure from the electric co-op model, right? Everything we're doing is under the hood, so to speak, of this really strong legacy, high-performing electric co-op. And what we've done is we've taken Virginia's construct, again, fully regulated, which means we go through a lot of additional steps than a co-op might go through in a non-regulated state. And we've created these for-profit affiliates. In fact, the Virginia Code, if you read it in its full context, it actually encourages for-profit affiliates because they don't want the co-op to have a non-taxable advantage, right? If it's getting into like home wiring services or something, they don't want it to have a kind of a toe-to-toe advantage over another installer, right? Another local business. So We've developed this affiliate structure. A couple of things as you go through this, you really begin to realize. One, take Brillet, for instance, in our data analytics and IT. Having that compartmentalized really accentuates hiring and attracting the right talent. Not to say that co-ops aren't attracting or able to attract in these wonderful places to work, but actually having kind of the best of both worlds. You've got this affiliate, under this, 80 plus year, kind of history electric co-op with this really stable, rate base and growing membership. And to have an affiliate under there that you carve out and you call it Brillet and you brand it, it actually, from day one, it actually helps on recruiting, right? What is the job that this individual is signing up for? Right.
It's clarity. Yeah.
We need a top-notch, world-class, cybersecurity and data analytics team, right? The same is true for Vividly Brighter, right? As we're talking about bringing on electricians and those types. What is the job you're signing up for? And that's rung very true in the hyperscale world. As we are setting up hyperscale energy services to set up its scheduling desk and its market services, we've attracted our vice president that leads that, came out of PJM. She was at PJM for 7 years and at the New York Power Authority for several years as well. We hired recently someone in our billing and settlements that had just retired out of Duke, right out of the Carolinas. So having that brand and that identity helps attract the right people and the right talent. It also helps us delineate cost, and it helps us work with our board of directors to kind of compartmentalize and to strategize around the various and many moving parts that is Rappahannock Electric Co-op today, right? We're always focused on our core traditional business, our people and the wires and the service and the safe and the reliable and the affordable and sustainable aspects of the co-op. But having these affiliates now allows us to have boards of directors and staff and leadership that then begin to conduct strategic planning and how that fits back into the bigger piece. So staffing's been a huge part of this. We've had to lean on a lot of contracts. If you kind of take the walk through the possibility of a data center becoming a reality, there's a lot of contract work. I also want to say that we've really benefited from just collaborating with other co-ops around the nation. Novec has been extremely helpful. Mecklenburg, we talked to the folks at Umatilla out on the West Coast, right? We've had a lot of really good, helpful co-op conversations. But ultimately, there comes a point in time where you've got to chart your course and you've got to ink your own contracts. Yep. And so we've spent a lot of time. There's been a lot of legal work around our business structure. There's been a lot of legal work around business contracts and risk management in those contracts. And when I speak of contracts, I'm really talking about kind of a series of contracts, a construction development agreement. That's what kicks off. Well, we start with an LOA, right? That basically kind of indicates an interest level, and we collect some application fees that are fairly significant. But the real dollars kick in at the CDA, or the Construction Development Agreement level, and that's the agreement that says REC is going to work with the transmission owner, whoever that might be, Dominion or First Energy in our territory, and we're going to request the interconnect, the transmission extension. We're going to build a substation, a 230 kV down to 34 kV substation, $55 million project, on land that the data center provided.
That's right.
Fully dedicated to them. This is not intermixed with the rest of the grid. Yep. And they're going to start paying that, 40 to 60% of that is paid up front immediately, and then the rest is securitized and paid, all of it prepaid before we do the work, and then it's trued up at the end. That's our construction development agreement. That's a big agreement. Yep. We've got 16 of those, 16 300 megawatt contracts underway, signed and in progress.
Can you get the contractors to build them?
We have an EPC, right? So we're working with a company called Empirical. They've got a good reputation and have done a lot of work, including in Virginia. We worked to kind of make life as manageable as possible, and we put kind of underneath that in our growth division, another thing we had to create to pull this off. We hired an EPC, and so with that EPC, we have not only a chief growth officer that is kind of overseeing the infrastructure, but we also have hyperscale engineers. we have project managers, we have contracts and project tracking individuals. We've had to put a lot of team members into this division. You know, REC in the last 24 months or so has, you know, contracted for about $900 million in substation projects just for this part of the business. This doesn't include the rest of our growing obligations. This is just for data centers. So we've done additional work with FERC Council, right, to help review some of the way we're going to participate in PJM, for instance, right, to make sure that we're taking all the right steps. Beyond that construction development agreement, we have an energy services agreement. That's the ongoing agreement that goes and points back to one of our tariffs, a dedicated tariff that basically bills the data center, you know, into the future for the infrastructure. Then the last piece of that contractual puzzle is a power supply agreement. And that is an agreement that says we're going to procure the electrons and the transmission service and everything the ancillaries, all that we need to get out of PJM, and we're going to take it through the co-op, and we're going to take it through this affiliate, and we're going to provide that power to your site and meet your load ramp. So the contracts, the amount of legal support to get this done is very significant, and it is very critical that you have the right legal support. Because of the volume of payments that we've been dealing with, we actually hired an additional accounting firm to do agreed upon services. This is in addition to our normal outside auditor. We now have an agreed upon services where we have actually Jackson Thornton has come in to review and do a quarterly attestation. This is voluntary, but we do a quarterly attestation on the data center, the dollars that are paid in, the transactions, the dollars that are sent out to contractors, whether it's buying transformers or circuit breakers, or whether it's to the EPC for design and construction services. There's a lot of moving parts here.
There really is. And apart from legal, let's talk about the liquidity factor and getting paid on time. And did you, under those contracts, you're pursuing a faster cadence of payment, aren't you?
Absolutely, right. So not only do we take the infrastructure payments as prepayments, we're doing the same thing for the power supply. This is not a monthly power bill like you might envision in your kind of traditional work as a co-op providing service. The market in PJM settles weekly. So right off the bat, right, we could have done monthly billing, but right off the bat, you're really kind of focusing on mitigating risks through weekly settlements. And better yet, mitigating risk through prepayments of weekly settlements. And then better yet, mitigating that risk through prepayments that are calculated based on the market forecast. Because the objective there is to make sure that when that settlement comes in, that we've reduced as much uncertainty as we can, that the data center itself has prepaid that anticipated settlement based on their load in this market at that moment for that week. And you're talking about turning that over 52 times a year. Yeah. Times each different data center. And in our hyperscale model, under hyperscale energy services, we have sub-affiliates for each data center so that they are standing alone on their own credit and capacity.
And they sign on to that agreement readily, or do they try to negotiate that out? Or?
The amount of negotiations is extensive, right? The amount of negotiations through, these are projects that are fast moving. They are multi-billion in nature. The data centers have to navigate the local codes and kind of the zoning and planning, and there's a lot of things that have to be navigated. They have their acquisition of their land and their site readiness, and they've got their plans around the construction and the staging of their buildings and the staging of the substations that we would provide that would go with that. There's a lot of negotiations around this because the dollars that we're speaking of here are, they're not your normal kayak payments, right? That we're used to, seeing even for a large subdivision. These are at such a next level that there are a lot of negotiations around this.
And how does that alter when you have a different type of data center? Like, there's a variety of data centers. Google's building its own data center for its own use.
Sure.
You have these ones that lease out their space, and then you have others you've never heard of that you got to be a little more careful about, probably.
That's why we built the model with the sub-affiliates,
Yeah.
because one data center may be investment grade and may be a household name and, a top 10 Fortune company in the world, right? Another one may be in a very different posture. The first one might be enterprise. We're using it for their own needs, or maybe it's a federal account or something. The next one might be a real estate investment group that has moved into the data center world. And you may have that where they're doing projects in 10 different markets at the same time, and you may have that where Virginia is the first project they've contemplated. So the structure of having hyperscale energy services, and again, we're talking about the electricity side, not the infrastructure. The Rappahannock builds, owns, operates, and maintains the infrastructure for every data center, regardless of its style. It's the energy provisioning that differs. Our plan is to take them all into the market, and our plan is to provide generation support if any of those desire to make that investment. But each of them may have a very different financial standing, and that's the need for the sub-affiliates, so that they are not unduly cross-subsidizing each other, and in the event of some type of default, that if they were in the same bucket, so to speak, and there were some type of default, you've got a competitor that's literally holding that financial obligation or being impacted by that. So our design is very different. It's not easy, but it also recognizes that there's a national crisis surrounding the amount of power available versus the amount of demand. That's particularly acute and significant here in Virginia, that the amount of reserves are diminishing, and that's true for most markets at this point. And as those reserves diminish, that puts upward pressure and volatility pressure on power prices. So we are assuming in our model that there will be volatile events. And these have occurred already, right? We can just look around the nation and look in PJM. They've occurred through polar vortex and Arctic events and summer heat waves. But they can also occur because of cybersecurity or some disruption in a natural gas delivery system, for instance. So we've worked to build a model. It's not perfect, and if someone comes up with a better model, we're gonna kind of chase what they're doing. But we've worked to build a model that we believe is the best model for the uncertainty of the future.
So let's talk about kind of your future view there. You have the potential to put steel in the ground, partnering with a data center if they want to. Do you envision any future where maybe co-ops should work on a broader scale in a larger region to collaborate to serve a customer?
Well, I think most of us have that with the G&T, right? I think there will be new ways that G&Ts go about solving the challenge, and I think there will be a very savvy solutions that are developed. But I also think that from a G&T perspective, there's a lot at the federal level that hasn't been decided yet, that is paramount as to how G&Ts might structure their involvement of their business. I think in the best case, a G&T could make that as a voluntary involvement on their terms, where the G&T can bring its full capacity, and it can assure itself and its member owners that it's got all the right financial protections to do that. Versus a G&T being forced into chasing thousands of megawatts of rapidly evolving load in a state like Virginia, where the customer can shop, right? Over 90 megawatts, the loads in Virginia over 90 megawatts can switch providers, right? That's a very difficult environment to try to chase 1,000 megawatt projects with power plants, right? That's not what we're doing, right? That's not what we're doing, with ODEC, right? ODEC is providing all of our traditional load growth, and they're doing a wonderful job. And then over here, we've got this market access. And then if a data center wants to take another step, we've carved that out in a way where we believe we could help facilitate. So I think that I'm sure there'll be other solutions, and there probably will be some things that we haven't thought about yet. But what we're trying to do is kind of get the best out of both worlds, and to provide our traditional members this very stable, reliable, world-class service, and then over here be this enabler and facilitator for these large loads.
So let's talk a little bit about our business, the lending world, and what, in your view, does Rappahannock Hyperscale need from a lender to make this work well, and what's the ultimate solution?
Great question. There's probably a lot to talk about here. First, we need our traditional business to be healthy, stable, and have access to capital funds for its traditional growth, whether that's fiber or utility replacements, and whether wherever that funding, whatever that work plan looks like. So I say the first thing we need is that traditional business to be healthy. The other thing we need is precisely what we're doing right here is this national perspective and the strategies and the sharing of information so that co-ops know who to talk to, they know which other co-ops are kind of dealing with the same challenges, they can come up with the right solutions, and they can kind of put that together by triangulating a little bit with what they've learned out across the co-op network. Beyond that, for the infrastructure and the electricity, those are very different. On the infrastructure side, we're taking prepayments. So that's been light on, there's really not any borrowing affiliated with that. We're doing a lot of monitoring of those transactions, but those funds are all derived from our members and the customer. It's the energy side where it gets really complicated because, and again, in the structured market, in the structured market, there's a certain amount of capital, a certain amount of credit or collateral that's required to enter that market, to even enter that, and it's based on what that load ramp looks like, maybe over the next year or two. And so, just to start one of these businesses, Hyperscale 1, for instance, which is now fully authorized to participate in PJM, just to start that type of business, you've got to inject that entity with a certain liquidity and credit requirement, right? So the co-op may need to make some seed investment, the customer, the member may be making additional investment, banks and lenders and organizations such as CFC might participate in that as well. And those numbers are large and they move pretty fast. And so that's part of it, is the liquidity around operating the affiliate structure to ensure that the affiliates, or if the co-op is doing it themselves, certainly if the co-op's doing it themselves, there's a tremendous liquidity need because the co-op could experience like a winter storm like occurred in Texas a few years ago, or even Winter Storm Elliott like we had in Virginia back in 2023, where we saw the market go up, in our case, 4 times as high, and we had, storm event at the same time. So a traditional co-op could be working to resolve impacts on its grid, which cost money, and crews from out of town and all that line of credit type of expenditure. And at the same time, there could be a serious event transpiring because of that cold in the power market, in the wholesale market, and they need the liquidity over there. So I would say liquidity and credit is the name of the game, and determining how that will be balanced between the customer and a traditional co-op, and in this case, the affiliate. And one of the best things about our affiliate structure is that we have kind of that wall between the co-op and the affiliate, and we can determine what our appetite might be for being involved in that.
Yeah, that's great. What are your final thoughts there for fellow cooperative CEOs that if they're getting that call and it's looking real like that data center is ready to lay down money to do engineering work?
Well, yeah. First of all, realize how fast these projects move, how impactful they could be to your county, right? We're talking about very significant impacts in terms of jobs, the construction wave, and the tax dollars, right? And we're talking, first responders, schools, parks, libraries, the things that communities need and want for growth. So there's going to inevitably be a lot of pressure on that co-op, right? It's potential, it's even a state economic development initiative, right? You might have a governor's office involved, right? So I think that's the first thing to recognize. Definitely spend a lot of time educating the board. We had workshops with our board. We had all-day workshops solely dedicated to serving a data center, and we've had all-day workshops around like power supply and how the market works and what generation concepts might look like. These are not easy bolt-ons to a regular board meeting, right? We're not just adding 45 minutes here or there. We're talking about dedicated, heavy lift, staff spending a lot of time building a volume of work to educate the board on the challenges and the opportunities, right? And to kind of be balanced in regard to doing that, to make sure that the board is fully informed. And part of the reason is because the very next thing you've got to do is start bringing in resources that you'd never contemplated. The legal resources, the financial resources, the contractual support, the amount of field trips or fact-finding missions that a co-op might need to go on would be very significant as well. The types of EPCs that you have to bring in, and the scale of the dollars and the transmission connections that you might be ordering. These are all fast-moving, they're all large-scale, and they're all complicated, and in multi-dimensional in terms of complications. So that co-op CEO and that leadership team is going to have to reach out for help. We worked early on with Intervision. Intervision was really helpful to kind of help us especially in the early months and years to kind of start to get our business shaped up. But we reached out to a lot of different advisors and service providers to help support us.
That's great. Any other final thoughts?
Well, I just want to thank you again. I really thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion. I hope that this conversation is enlightening for somebody out there that's either got a project or contemplating a project. I would encourage reach out. Don't hesitate to ask Rappahannock Electric or Hyperscale what we're doing. We've done our best to size up kind of our circumstances. Every co-op's different, but we're glad to share our story. We want to make sure that it helps somebody else out there.
I'm impressed. I'm excited for you guys. I think I know it's new and it's unknown, but I think you're heading in the right direction, and it may well be the model of the future. So congrats to you and your team, and we're here to help you.
Thank you so much. Yep. We appreciate all that CFC is doing. Thank you. Yep. Thank you.